Hello everybody, welcome to our class. We are learning Ashlag Kabbalists, and we are learning from this book that we are on our third or fourth class. We're only at the pretty much the beginning of the book, so anybody who wants to join us, they can jump right in. It's called Spiritual Principles, and it's basically a collection of excerpts from all of the writings of the Baal Sulam Rav Yehuda Ashlag, who's master Kabbalist, lived 75 years ago and was able to explain Kabbalah in a very modern way that is understandable for us. And so each class I try to start off with an introduction and try to give us something, that helps us understand what it is that we're doing here. So in the world, in the history of the world and with the history of thought, it's pretty much a universal belief, understanding that there are things that are beyond what we know. And this is, I look for something that both secular people and religious people can agree on. And so perhaps this is something, one of the few things that we can agree on is that there are some things that we don't know, and there are also things that are beyond what we can know. And so this is very much what the Kabbalists tell us, that God himself is unknowable, but that there are many, many levels that are attainable, much more than people might imagine. And so what do we mean when we say something is knowable? In Kabbalah, we are not talking about somebody philosophizing or somebody telling you something. So I tell you that there's a God. So that's, I'm making an assumption and I'm telling you about it. And so that's not what we're talking about in Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, we're talking about spiritual attainment, meaning that we're talking about getting to a level that something becomes self-evident and experiential. And so love is a very good example of this, and there's a reason why it's a very good example. If you think about love, it's when you are in love, you are completely, absolutely sure of what you're feeling, and even though it's not something that's you can tangibly hold, it's something that is completely real to you. That's called being in attainment. When you are in love, you are in attainment of these feelings and this consciousness, and it is what it is, and no one else can take it away from you, and no one can tell you that it's not what it is, right? So that's what we mean when we say attainment. So in Kabbalah, in Judaism, we look to people who have reached levels of spiritual attainment, very high levels of spiritual attainment. And so like we have Moses, and we have the patriarchs, and we have Joseph, right? We have all of these people who were leaders, and we look to them because of their attainment of these spiritual degrees. And so what is it that the Kabbalists tell us is the highest thing that we can attain? What they say is that from attainment, from being in these levels themselves, is that we can know that there is a creator, and that the creator had a desire to create this world, that this world was created for a reason. And the reason was that the creator wanted to give over pleasure and goodness to the created beings. So God created us in order to give us tremendous pleasure, okay? And so anybody who's alive knows that seems like something went wrong, right? We live in a world where there is suffering of all kinds, limitations of all kinds, lacking of all kinds, and so if we want to believe in God and we want to believe in God's goodness and God's power, we have to have it's an article of faith, right? If we are outside of that, seeing that, perceiving that that's true, then we have to take it on faith that it's true, right? But in Kabbalah, in Torah and mitzvos, the internal aspect of Torah, which is something that we are entering into now because we are exiting the exile and entering into these higher states of consciousness, which we've done in the past at the First Temple era and the Second Temple era, and at Har Sinai, at in the giving of the Torah. These are times in history where we reached a certain level of spiritual attainment, and we were able to perceive these things and feel these things and embody these things that we're talking about now. And so as we move into into the redemption, we are going to regain these abilities to enter into these higher states. And so what the Kabbalists tell us is that that when God had this idea, this thought, this desire to give over goodness, it was immediately completed, and that's called the world of Ein Sof. All of the light went into the vessel, meaning all the pleasure went into the created being. God created something from nothing, and that something from nothing is us, and filled us with all of the delight, all of the pleasures, every single pleasure that you can imagine, and many, many, many times fuller than that. We've experienced all that. So what was the problem? Why didn't we stay in that world of Ein Sof, the Kabbalists tell us? The reason we didn't stay there is because we accepted everything robotically. We didn't have free will. We had no choice but to accept the pleasure. The pleasure was so delicious and so all-encompassing, and we were only a receptor. We only had the ability to receive. That's what God created, an ability to receive pleasure. And so at that point, we had to make a move, so to speak, in consciousness, and we had to leave that world of all-encompassing pleasure so that we can attain additional qualities, and those qualities that Kabbalists tell us are free will and the ability to engage in a relationship. And so that is what we are experiencing now. Okay, so that was my preamble, that was my introduction, and so let's jump right into the book. We are up to principle 5. I'm not sure if we did it last time, but we'll review it because it was a lot here. So let me read it and then we can discuss it. God's desire is to give. The creation's desire is to receive. This state of creation's attribute, being opposite to that of God, spiritually distances creation from God. Okay, so what the Kabbalists are telling us here is that God had a desire to give over goodness. He created a vessel, that's all of us collectively, that could receive all of this pleasure. So this is a beautiful state of Ein Sof, which means infinity, which means that all of the pleasure and all of the giver and the taker were in complete union, except for one small quality that becomes very, very important, all important, is that because God is in the quality of giving and we are in the quality of receiving, we are completely opposite each other. And so this is a problem in spirituality, because what we're trying to do is attain complete adhesion with the Creator. And the Kabbalists tell us that that adhesion, being close to someone, means being similar to them. And so this is what we're trying to achieve. So let me keep reading. Spiritual reality transcends the dimension of time and space. Therefore, closeness and distance in spirituality is a measure of similarity and difference. We see in our physical reality that if two people have completely opposite behaviors and opinions, they are not able to connect with each other. It is the same spiritually. Even though God's glory fills the entire universe, our desire to receive is opposite from God's desire to give, and therefore distances us from God. Okay, so here we have to understand a fundamental principle, law of spirituality. In spirituality, we are not talking about physical space. Okay, these are realms of consciousness that exist above time and space. So here the Kabbalists are telling us that these realms that are non-physical, there is the way that we measure whether something is close or far away is whether something is similar or different. And so the more similar things are, the more close they are in spirituality. The more different they are in their desires, in their qualities, the further away they are. So in physicality, you can have a bad person and a good person who are sitting right next to each other on a bus, and they're considered in the physical world to be very close. Here, in the spiritual worlds, however, the way that things are brought close together is if they have the same desire. So if something has a loving desire and something has a hateful desire, those things in spirituality are very distant. So here the Kabbalists are telling us that in spirituality, because God created us to receive all the pleasure, and God wanted to give all the pleasure, we are in this one regard exactly opposite the Creator. And our desire, since we want to return the love that God is giving to us, we want to be close, right? If you're in love with somebody, you want to be as close as possible to them as you can get. And so here is the reason for creation, is that we left the world of Ein Sof, the created beings. This is in spiritual dimensions. This is very, very high above the physical manifestation that we live in. This is in the spiritual realms. We decided not to take the light because we realized that it is something that is distancing us from the one that loves us. And so with a desire to return the love, we said, wait, if God's a giver, I also want to be a giver. And this is what starts the whole cascading of the spiritual worlds that we end up in the physical realm. Now that's a lot, and that's what the Kabbalists study, and that's what we're going to study. But don't try to wrap your head around all of that, all of those pieces, but know what they're telling us here, that in spirituality, similarity of form, similarity of desire, it brings you close. And when you have oppositional desires or attributes, it brings you further apart. Okay? We connect with God and become able to experience God when our attributes become similar to those of God. This is what the sages mean when they speak about attaining the state of Devekut, union with God. As God's desire is to give, our connection with God depends on how much we also desire to give. Okay? So we're going to learn how all the spiritual worlds of consciousness came into existence step by step. Each one was a cause and effect of coming to a further and further away place for reasons that we're going to get into. So don't it takes a very long time for almost everybody, maybe everybody, to start to appreciate what's being said here. And so just you'll hear it over and over again. We'll discuss it, and slowly but surely these things will start to become things that you are comfortable with, and they feel like laws of nature that you can now appreciate and begin to work with. Okay, principle 6. In order for us to be able to experience the gift of God's goodness in a state of union with God, our receiving needs to be elevated to a state of giving. Our spiritual work is to attain this state of giving. So we said that we are opposite God, and that God was trying to give us everything. And so what's so bad about that? And so the answer is that the highest quality that God wanted to give us is to have a relationship with Him, to be close to Him. Now that may sound lofty, but if you just think about life, if a woman falls in love with a man and the man has a good job, and if you feel like inverting this analogy to the woman being the one who has the fancy job, go for it. If that's how you're more comfortable with that, let's do that one. So a couple meets, and the woman has this very fancy job, and she has a beautiful house and beautiful cars, and she has this, a platinum card, and she can go to any meals as she wants, whenever she wants. So if you're in with this woman and you want to get close to her, but you're really trying to get close to the gifts that she's giving you, then that's not a very good relationship. You want the cars, and you want the house, and you want the fancy dinners, but you're not really interested in the person who's behind all of those gifts. That would be a very limited amount of pleasure. The truest pleasure would be if you're completely desiring to be with that person, and you want to be as close to that person, and then everything else that you do together, and that you all the pleasures that you experience together become a beautiful vehicle for your relationship, right? So we all understand that it's something that, if we're in a relationship and we see the other person doesn't understand that, then there's immediately a problem, right? Everybody knows what happens if you care more about the stuff and not enough about the person, right? So that's precisely what we're talking about. So in order to attain all the goodness and all the pleasure, all the pleasures in this world and all the spiritual pleasures, in order for us to truly experience these things, right? So we all know, food can be healthy and it can be unhealthy. Money could be a great thing, it could be a bad thing, right? So the question is your kavanah, your intention, how you relate to these physical things, right? So that's precisely what we're talking about. In order to enjoy all the gifts that God gives us, we have to be in a positive, good, desirous relationship with the one who's giving us the gifts, and that's what we're talking about here, okay? Spiritual work does not involve a variety of different endeavors, as many people think. Spiritual work is only a matter of transcending our desire to receive and attaining the desire to give. Everything else is only a branch rooted in this transformation. Okay, the Bala Sulam comes and he quotes Gemara, he quotes Rav Hillel, and he says that everything, all the mitzvos are ancillary to one thing. The only thing that we're trying to accomplish through Torah and mitzvos is devekut with Hashem, adhesion with Hashem, and the only way to achieve that is by transcending our nature that was given to us, the nature to receive, and building a second nature, and that nature is to want to give, to want to love, to want to be concerned with the other. And all of the mitzvos in Torah and the entire universe and everything that's going on and every song that was ever sung and every movie that was ever made and everything that was ever done from the beginning of history until now is only part of an evolution of human consciousness that is trying to take us from being just receivers of creatures who want to receive everything for our own nature to transcendent beings that want to unify and balance and be in love with everything and be concerned with giving, okay? With receiving everything that we get, but with the intention of having it be a vehicle for coming close to everybody else and coming close to nature and coming close to God and becoming, and that is the messianic vision that is being talked about in the Torah, but the Kabbalists explain it in this more of a mechanical way that I think a lot of people, searchers, seekers today will appreciate. Okay, principle 7. There are 4 general stages of spiritual development. Receiving to receive. The desire to receive is ingrained in our nature. This is where we begin. We were purposefully created with a desire to receive and given the spiritual work of elevating the desire to its perfected state. In this first stage, we care only about ourselves and fulfilling our personal desires. Okay? So if people want to know why we are all so selfish and why the world is such a selfish place and why we see the world as being like this, it's because there is a evolution of consciousness going on, and that the desire to receive was created so that we can receive all of the goodness. But that something has to happen. That's why we're in this world. That's why we're born. That's why we're reincarnated, in order to do something with our selfish natures. This first level, the receiving to receive, being a selfish animal, is the animal soul. That is what we start off with, okay? Until we have a bar mitzvah in Judaism. That is the stage at which they're supposed to begin to try to manage and work with their nature of reception and try to start to build out of it, right? Leave Egypt is what we call it in the story of the Torah, right? Leaving Egypt. Egypt is the ego. The ego is our selfish box that we find ourselves in, okay? Next level, giving to receive. This stage of spiritual development is an intermediate stage between the previous level of loving only ourselves and the next level of truly loving others and having unconditional love for God. In this stage, a person is involved in spiritual work and is giving to others. The motivation for spiritual work and giving, however, is not yet from a place of pure love of the other, but is rather motivated by the hope of receiving a reward. In this stage, we are giving, but our intention is to receive. Okay? Giving to receive. That is the second level of human consciousness. We have children, we say, if you clean your room, I will give you the cookie. They want the cookie, and they're willing to clean their room because they want the cookie. They are doing something for someone else, they're doing something for you, but they're doing it because they want something in return. A quid pro quo. Now, much of the world that we experience is a world of giving to receive. If you go to work and you work all day, you're working because you want a paycheck at the end of the week. That is, if you're in that consciousness during that relationship with your boss and with your workplace, you are in the consciousness of giving to receive, okay? That's what we're talking about. This is not something, spirituality is not something that is, fuzzy, and you don't need yoga mats, and you don't need fancy clothes, you don't need, robes and turbans, you don't need beads. This is just the nature of reality, and the Kabbalists are telling us this, and so you do not need anything else other than to appreciate what is being said here to do this work. And so we explain many times how the physical mitzvot tie into this, and it's very profound and it has to do with all of the levels of consciousness, and that the lowest plane of consciousness, our reality, the material plane, is the lowest world, and that also inverts and becomes the highest world. But these are not, we're digressing, but the point here is that what we're saying here is understandable and learnable, and then the method that is being outlined in Torah and Mitzvos, with the inner aspect being Kabbalah, is doable. And the more, as we move closer to the redemption, which is happening now, as everybody feels it, especially here with the war and in Israel, this is something that we are ready to understand and comprehend and start to engage in a very, very practical way, okay? Giving to give. This is a state of being able to give only with intention to give. The giving is motivated purely by love. There is no desire to receive anything in return for the giving, not in this world and not in the world to come. The sages refer to this exalted spiritual level as l'shem shamayim. You go to work and you are working for a paycheck when you come home to your beautiful husband or wife or kids, okay? You're the same person that was working in giving in order to receive at work. But now you're home and now you're in a different consciousness, and you shift into another consciousness immediately. You are now giving your children dinner and you're playing with the kids, not because you want them to pay you and not because you want them something selfishly for yourself. It's not like you expect them to do something for you. You only love them and you hope that they grow into wonderful people and have more and more success and pleasure and happiness. So you're giving in order to give. So here you could see, at work you're in one level of consciousness, and when you get home you're in another level of consciousness. As we start to understand these levels, then the Kabbalists are going to teach us precisely how to start to work these levels so that we can build our higher souls, meaning that we can engage in these higher degrees of consciousness and receive all the light that was meant for us. I hope that made sense, and we will pick this up next week. Thank you, everybody.